Welcome to Perspective in Practice. I'm your host, Rachel Sadoff, and today we have with us Chief Encouragement Officer of Slay to Success, Rochelle Hemingway. How are you today, Rochelle?
I'm well. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. So, Rochelle, you grew up in CoComo, Indiana, correct?
I did.
Yeah, and your dad served for 23 years in the Air Force.
He
So, how
did. Yes.
did his military background and family legacy shape your early values and ambitions?
Well, first, I want to say thank you for having me here on the show. But that's a really great question because my dad, was very disciplined.
Mhm.
There was a lot of structure in our home. We had chores, we had tasks, and he made sure that we did these things. And it was like non-negotiable. So his upbringing really influenced our upbringing.
Yeah.
And we could see that he was a man of a lot of words, but he was also of action.
Okay.
So we sat at his feet and we really learned how to develop these skills at a very early age.
Yeah. Yeah. Action is
Yeah.
such a huge part of leadership. I
Yeah.
think because a lot of people want to lead, but I feel like a lot of people struggle with kind of like putting whatever their cause is into action.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I feel like that's one big definer of successful leadership, I would say. I don't know. What is your thoughts?
My thoughts exactly. When I saw him actually doing it, walking the walk and talking the talk, it allows you to kind of step into that space and to be a little bit more intentional.
Yeah.
You're a little bit more observant, and what are the results
Yeah.
that you get from taking the actions? And so, because we were seeing that on a regular basis, it was kind of natural for us to start to move in that direction. And there's four children, and so we all kind of took pieces of what he was teaching us and implementing in our daily lives now. And I'm very disciplined. I know our son is just kind of like, "What's this?" And so he's finding his way through being accountable, time
Yeah.
management, attention to detail, all those little nuances of leadership that we really don't think about, that are important.
Yeah. Yeah. So before you stepped into the military, you mentioned that you weighed more than you do now and were feeling uncertain kind of about your health and future. Can you share how that realization, especially like turning your time at the restaurant and then transforming into like the path of a leadership role into the military, how that kind of happened or impacted you?
Yeah. So I'm not, like holding anything back because I feel like this will be helpful for some others. So I was 200 pounds at one time in my junior year of high school. And I remember the band leader, we were getting new uniforms and we were getting weighed and getting our height. And they actually announced my weight in front of everybody,
Jeez.
which was embarrassing, humiliating, and I didn't quite understand how I got there. But
Yep.
then over a course of time, I took a job at this restaurant. It's a restaurant chain called Chi Chi's, and I was a busgirl. And I saw quickly that the weight was coming off because I was in movement.
Yeah.
I was eating less, I was doing more activity. And I really started to see that there was more options for me. There was a world out there that now I at first thought I was going to stay in Kokomo, Indiana for the rest of my life. But it really allowed me to open up to what the possibilities were.
Yeah.
And I don't know if anyone else has experienced, a weight loss, but you find yourself in a different mindset.
Yeah.
because you're like, man, it's hard. It was hard to lose the weight. The hardest part is to maintain the weight loss, which I've had, to do over the course of, 35, 40 years.
Yeah.
But I realized that there are a lot of things that we are capable of doing and
Yeah.
overcoming.
Yeah.
So it just really allowed me to figure out who Rochelle was.
Yeah.
Like, outside of just being, an overweight child.
Yeah. So after you kind of lost the weight, a friend of yours
Yeah.
asked you if you wanted to join the military, and that kind of changed
Yeah,
everything for you, right?
absolutely. Even though my dad was in the military, and I saw him, going to work, I didn't understand what exactly military lifestyle was.
Yeah.
I knew you wore a uniform and I knew you had a particular job, but when my friend said, "Hey, I think you're like at that point where you can join the military, you can meet the weight requirement." I said, "Huh?" She said, "It's a great way for us to get out of CoComo." And I was like, "Okay." So wound up at the recruiter's office, and she went into the Army, I went into the Air Force. But I really had no idea what I was getting myself into. And
Yeah.
my dad even said, "You're not going to make it. You
Oh,
will be back in a few years."
wow.
And I think that was a reverse psychology. You look back on it now, like you need to make the most of this,
Yeah.
get there and do what you need to do. But I think he knew that I had it in me. I just needed to know for myself and believe and trust in myself that I could do it.
Yeah. I had a similar, not with the military experience where I was a new cyclist, like bike rider. And
Yeah.
there's this big race in the Portland, Oregon, Washington area called the STP, Seattle to Portland, and it's 204 miles. And there's the option to ride it in one day or two. And
Oh,
I rode the first 100 and was done by like 11:30. So I called my dad and I was like, I think I'm going to keep writing. Um, Whenever I get tired, I'm just going to call you to bring me a sleeping bag and I'll finish it off the next day. And then I got
yeah.
60 miles from the finish line and my dad was like, "Don't do it. Don't do it. Like, this isn't a good idea. You're brand new at this sport." And that just made me mad.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
just
Yeah,
heard like if he actually wanted you not to do this, he should have just encouraged you.
exactly.
But telling you like don't
Exactly.
do it was like the worst thing he could have done.
Don't tell us not to do something.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so then that day I rode 204 miles. And then by the time I was done, I was like, what the heck, Rachel? What are you doing? This was a terrible idea, but you did it.
But you did it. Oh gosh. I agree.
Yes, the stubbornness. Yes. But just
Oh,
when people tell you, especially as like a young leader, when people tell you like don't do something, you can't do it. It just becomes like this fueling fire in some people
absolutely.
to just be like, watch me.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I'm gonna prove you wrong.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about your leadership journey. So your first role as a medical technician taught you that leadership begins with self-discipline. What were
Yeah.
some of the initial challenges you faced in mastering this like self-leadership in such a, structured environment?
Yeah. Well, I was so used to, being told what to do because that's really what happens when you go in the military. You're given orders.
Yeah.
But when you're in the medical community, you have to really understand what you're doing because you're impacting lives, like literally.
Yeah.
Like if someone's dying or someone is in, a health crisis, you have to fall back onto your training. You have to make decisions in quick time. You have to control your emotions because, it is a stressful situation
Yeah.
when you get into the medical
Yeah.
health. And so I had to learn that self leadership had to be something that I needed to master right away. Even though I got the training and so forth, they allow you to, you have to sometimes make quick decisions, and there's no one breathing down your neck, if you
Yeah.
will, in the emergency room or in the ambulance telling you, hey, you need to do X, Y, and Z to sustain life.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it really taught me a lot more than just taking orders.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Because you kind of moved up quick. Like you were fast tracked to becoming an independent duty technician. And then you
yeah.
were, traveling around the world, right?
Oh, yeah. And
Yeah.
these are places where I didn't even know existed. I'm like,
Yeah.
you plot me in the middle of nowhere with, 10, 12 people. For example, we were in Vietnam, and we were doing a mission where we were looking for missing persons from the Vietnamese War. And we were dropped in the middle of a jungle
Wow.
and told, hey, you like, get after it. But little to no knowledge about, I have to not only take care of my team members, but I also have to take care of the members that come up from the local community.
Yeah.
So, there was 90 Vietnamese workers that I was also responsible for their health and their wellness.
Yeah.
And so there are some language barriers. There is, some cultural sensitivities, the interpersonal connections that you need to understand.
Yeah.
And all these things taught me that, leadership is, big. It's, it's,
Yes.
it's, it's more than just being the person out in front. You also have to have empathy and understanding. And these situational awareness about where I was and
Yeah.
who I was providing medical service to allowed me to really think about, you know, serving something and doing something bigger than myself.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the biggest lessons that I learned through as an independent duty medical technician.
Yeah. Can you share maybe a few things that have worked for you? Just building interpersonal connections overseas. Maybe when you're new to a culture, or definitely the odd man out of that culture, being where something is a dominant culture and you're the person coming in. What are some
Yeah.
tips that you have used to kind of build some of those interpersonal connections and trust as a leader?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think one, you have to learn the culture. You have to really listen to the briefing. Um, and or if you don't get a briefing, do your own research
Yeah,
on where you're going, how do they communicate, what is the cultural norms,
yeah,
what are some no-nos,
yeah,
what are some things that may get you into trouble. You have to have a good understanding of where you're going.
yeah,
The other is observing, watching how people interact with one another. What are they doing? I know when I went to Turkey, they were actually kissing, like the pecks on the cheeks and so forth. And they were you have tea, it's called chai, and you must have tea before you start talking about business. All
yeah,
right. These are things that some people don't quite understand because, in our culture, we just want to get there, so, but there is a process in some of these cultures on how do you um, build the right relationships because you're building trust. That's really what you're trying to do. So, really having a great understanding, watching, listening, observing,
yeah.
really taking the time in to see where you're at and, build relationships one at a time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a great lesson to kind of share because I know, like, in American culture, we talk business all
Hmm.
day, every day,
Hmm.
24/7. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter if it's Sunday. But,
Nope.
there's like a lot of cultures, like European cultures, like they're like, we don't talk business after this time of day, or we don't talk business at parties, or we don't talk business, at family events, where Americans are like, we talk business whenever we can. So it's very, just different in culture. And so understanding that as
Yeah.
a leader is really important, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So What are some key lessons did you learn about resilience and adaptability throughout your career in the military?
Oh, well, I learned that failure is is important to growth. Now, in the military, there's a lot of no-fail missions. They'll say it over and over again, but I learned not to avoid failure.
Yeah.
I pushed through, and when I got knocked down, I had to pick myself back up again and find a new path or change things just slightly so that way I can continue to learn, evolve, and grow. And, resiliency is probably my second name,
Yeah.
you know, because I knew that I was going to be upon opposition, especially as I started to mature and get into some highly coveted leadership roles. And so, how was I going to continue to show up every single day?
Yeah.
Right. And I think most of us want to show up as the best version of ourselves.
Yeah.
And so, but you do have to get out of your comfort zone. So
Yeah.
I was
Hmm.
always uncomfortable. But I realized that the more uncomfortable that I got, the better I was getting after it, the better I could like face those barriers and just go, okay, I've seen this again. Oh, this didn't work. Okay, that's okay. Let's reset, let's refocus and get back after it again.
Hmm.
So, and I think that's key is it's just a life skill.
Hmm.
It's a life skill because things are always changing, forever evolving. And so, what are you doing to make sure that you're actually able to show up for that challenge every single time?
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice because I know through some of our past conversations, like you've had some experiences like with your military career where you've been promoted into new roles pretty
Yeah.
quickly and into like big roles as like a first sergeant and things like that. Um, and like being uncomfortable or being comfortable with being uncomfortable is definitely something I would imagine would be one of those like leadership things that you um had to kind of learn in order to make some of those big jumps. Were there
Oh, yeah.
other advice things that you can give people that have had to maybe make career positional jumps and are like, where am I right now? What do I do?
Well, yeah. I would say if you're getting promoted into those areas, know that you belong there.
Yeah.
All right. Like own this space.
Yeah.
They would not have selected you if they didn't think that you could deliver the results.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes, we want to shrink, because we don't see anyone else that looks like us and we don't think that we have it in us. And I say my confidence level grew more and more every single time they said, "Hey, we want you to serve in this particular role." And instead of asking all the questions like, why me? And, I'm not quite sure, I'm not qualified. Um, I had to like find it within myself and say, yeah, queen, yeah, you are. You got this.
Yeah.
So and I realized that over time that, I was doing things right.
Hmm.
These were confirmations and validations I was getting things right. I still had a lot to learn, but I leveraged those things that I was getting right into those new roles that I was getting.
Yeah.
And then I just compounded it with new skills, new understanding, new strategies
Yeah.
to overcome. And I was allowing myself to become a better leader.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the keys is to understand you're not going to know it all. You're not going to have all the answers, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Right. But this is an opportunity for you to actually learn more
Yeah.
and to do more in that. So think of it as a great opportunity to lean into spaces that you didn't think that you could even serve in or be a part of.
Yes, no, I love it. I love it. So being the only Black woman on a leadership team overseeing over, 8,000 personnel, particularly navigating these challenges, what did that experience teach you about inclusiveness and effective leadership?
Man, that's that's very That was a very good question. Um, so, for example, my last role was serving as a command chief master sergeant at Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota. And I was the only a lot in a lot of rooms. But, instead of looking at it from that perspective, I looked at it as this is an opportunity for me to really show up into this space and give them my perspective and open up the door for others behind me,
Yeah,
so they can learn from me, and I was very vulnerable and transparent with them, and
yeah,
particularly at this role because I was the only.
yeah,
And you can see it as a detriment or you can see it as, well, you know what? This is the opportunity that you lean in even more
yeah,
and you share your experiences, you share your thoughts, you share the challenges that you've had, so they would have more empathy for whoever comes up behind you. And maybe
yeah,
perhaps that person is another Black woman,
yeah,
so I learned that it was okay to let my guard down.
yeah,
It was okay for them to know more about who Rochelle was, the many layers
yeah,
that we have,
yeah,
and again, I think that it served me very well.
yeah, yeah. Awesome. 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 So you mentioned a transformative mentorship experience when you were in
Oh,
Japan. Can you share a little bit more about that? Because I know in our past conversation you talked about watch, observe, and question. Can you share
yeah,
about that?
absolutely. So I had a mentor. Her name is Chief Master Sergeant Emily Hunt Brown, and she's retired, but she was the first Black female chief that I saw in my career. And this was at my 16th year of service.
Wow.
And, she welcomed me. And then one day she took me into her office and said, okay, here is where your leadership experience is going to change.
Yeah.
I see your potential. I want you to understand this watch, observe, questioning aspect. I want you to come into the meetings. I want you to sit on the sidelines, and I just want you to start writing things down. I
Mm,
want you to know who's winning. I want to open you up to who's earning respect, who's not winning, and why.
yeah.
you know, all these things that she taught me just by saying, hey, I want to share my whole world of leadership.
Yeah.
It changed the trajectory of my career.
Yeah.
Like 2 years with her was phenomenal and profound.
Yeah.
And I always attribute her as to, part of my success in the military. Because if I didn't know her, I think I would have went about it in a different way.
Yeah.
And she allowed me to really ask a lot of questions,
Yeah.
ask questions about policies, standards, procedures, things that I would have not been in tune to, if she didn't just say, hey, like, come with me.
Yeah, yeah, no. I even not obviously I'm not in the military, but I, just recently, found an Asian American woman that is in my industry. And I was like, when I met her, I was like, will you mentor me? I was like, I just feel like we have similar stories and it doesn't always like there's things you can teach me so that it's not as hard for me as it was you.
Absolutely.
Because
I love that.
I just need to take it in.
Yeah, we need that. Again, I felt like she, and not in a condescending way, but kind of like saved me from myself
Yeah.
because I was doing a lot of different things, and I had a lot of technicians that I was responsible for at that point, and I only knew what I knew. So, she was sharing with me, hey, you need to think about this. You need to think about that. Every person's different. You have to approach them differently. What works for one is not going to work for the next. I mean, it was that intricate detailing that really allowed me to think about what I was doing
Hmm.
and being a little bit more intentional and being a little bit more aware
Mhm.
Um, behaviors had to change. My communication skills had to improve. So yeah, it was definitely like eye-opening, and I thank her every day.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So transitioning from a 30-year
Ooh,
military career to building Slate to success is, a significant leap. What parallels do you see between, military leadership and running a successful business? And how does it influence your approach as a CEO?
yeah. It was a hard pivot. I say that, but once I got into the business, I really started to see there were some very similar uh, ways that I was leading in the Air Force. I was leading my business, and one is being mission focused. So I empower women professionals, especially women veterans, to, improve their personal brand.
Yeah,
And that's through appearance, behaviors, communications, and their digital presence. So when I'm working with these women, I always think about the mission. What is it behind the business? Yeah, business is great. But I think when you're coming from a heart of, I want to serve and help others, it's
mhm,
a whole different way that you approach it. I'm very passionate about what I'm doing. The other one is discipline and execution.
mhm.
There are some things in business that must get done.
Yeah,
So I have a schedule of things I need to do, and I have to carve out the time. But it's not only just, saying those things, it's actually you have to do.
yeah,
You have to do. And that's the same way that it was in the military, discipline and execution. You've got to take the action to make things happen, or they just don't.
yeah,
The other is resiliency, of course, and mental fortitude.
yeah,
Because sometimes in business, you think, oh, I got it all together, and things are, humming along. And then all of a sudden, you get a break and there's nothing happening to it. And you're like, what is happening? So you
yeah,
have to pivot,
yeah,
So I had to be flexible when I was in the military all the time because I get new supervisors, we get new missions, we get, new environments. And so how do you do in those particular changes? And so I learned in business, this is just exactly what you do.
yeah.
So it's most fitting that I'm like, oh wow, I had no idea I could be chief of anything when it came to business.
Yeah. Yeah.
you know
I always say that, like, as a business owner, you have to be adaptable and flexible because
yeah.
you never know when the pandemic's going to come and,
Oh,
change or die. And, there was it. And I always tell people just because you change right now doesn't mean it has to be forever,
right.
but that's
Yes.
the situation right now. And if you're not willing to change,
Yeah.
with the environment and what your client is asking for, then you're no longer serving a need.
Yes. Absolutely. So
Yeah.
that, in the military, you have to sometimes like do these out briefs, and you have to give like secondary and tertiary effects and the outcomes to the decisions that are being made. And so in business, it's kind of the same way. You're doing your market research, understanding who your clients are, what are they asking you for, what is the gap that you're filling. All of these things that I learned while I was in the military are transferable in my business.
Yeah.
So I think I always encourage, my veterans to think about becoming an entrepreneur because we've had the skills to kind of challenge ourselves, and they have been working for me in business.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Let's talk a little bit about advice.
yeah,
What advice would you give to aspiring leaders, particularly women of color, who are striving to make a mark in their industry where they're underrepresented?
yeah. So first, I would say find multiple mentors.
Yeah.
All right. Now I had, my chief, and she was my first mentor, but I realized that I needed different perspectives, different ways of thinking, opinions, so build your board of advisors or your board of directors, have someone that can poke the holes into the things that you're doing, have someone who's your cheerleader, have someone who is playing devil's advocate. You have to have different types of mentors. I would also say, build your allies, find those people that are in agreement with what you do, who are supportive and particularly can speak to you and what you do in different rooms that you're not in.
Yeah.
I would say also show up intentionally. It's important that we share what we know when we're at the tables, and not figuring out like, oh, if I say this, I'm going to be, I might not be correct, all the way correct or whatnot. And it's not even about that. You have this role now that you serve in. Like, let's step into it and really show what you can do and how you can deliver the results.
Yeah.
Um, I'd also say that you need some mental, wellness, some ways to build yourself up, build your confidence level up,
Yeah.
because you will get knocked down.
Yeah.
You will. But how do you get back up the next day,
Yeah.
and be even stronger than you were before? And that requires you to really sit with yourself and ask, are the strategies that I'm using appropriate for this role that I'm going into?
Yeah.
Because, like you said, things change.
Yeah.
What worked well for you in a different role may not work well for you in this new role,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
I always talk about like as an entrepreneur, like I only take advice from other entrepreneurs that have done it themselves.
Yeah,
And you always need that pick me up person.
yeah.
Even during the pandemic, at the start of the pandemic, I remember
Ugh,
everybody like canceled projects. And
ugh,
I remember asking my dad, who is also an entrepreneur, should I try to find a job? And he said, no, it's not time yet. Keep hustling. And I still have not been employed by anyone but myself. So, you always just gotta find that person that believes in you almost more than you believe in yourself that will just you
absolutely.
keep going,
Yeah.
keep going.
And I also would share that you would need to have your personal mantra. Now, this is where Slade comes in, right? I think that if I did not take on this word and really build it to what I can do in the word slay, I don't know if I would have gotten to 30 years or even gotten to the business because it's part of the business name. But, for those that are not quite sure what the word means, it means to kill it, to dominate it, and to nail it, to be on point, to impress greatly, to dream big and work hard until you own it.
Hmm.
But I also created an acronym for myself
Yeah.
that I found that other people were latched on to, which is stay ready to be ready, lead out loud, a sense of community, and you are built to last. And so these are the things and the thoughts that, permeate my whole being, as to how I am showing up in this next chapter.
Yeah.
If it worked for me towards the end of my career, certainly it could work for me in this next, and it has. And I said, you know what? That's what I tell everyone. Keep on slaying, like you got to keep moving. You got to keep
Yeah.
pushing forward, even when you think that things are just looking dim and they just don't look as if things are going to turn around. You just got to stay the course.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Definitely. I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much, Rochelle, for sharing your journey and your leadership insights. It's been a pleasure hearing about your experience and the lessons you've learned along the way. And for our viewers, if you enjoyed hearing Rochelle's insights today, don't miss other break the norm leadership interviews. And if your organization is interested in learning more about how break the norm can help you develop your greatest asset, your people, click the link below. Thanks so much, Rochelle.
You're welcome. Thank you, Rachel. Appreciate you.